You may love that big old tree in your backyard, or the wooden shingles that give your home character. But would you get rid of them if it meant potentially saving your house from a fire? This question sounds simple in theory. Obviously, we want to do whatever it takes to protect our homes, our communities. But would we really? What if I told you that even with wildfires becoming a new normal,
Holy look at that! Roll your window up.
and even though we know how to protect neighborhoods and homes, a lot of people just don't do it.
No, of course not. There's no risk of fire in this area.
So why is that? And is there anything that would convince us to prepare for a fire that hasn't happened yet? There's already been a lot of research done on how to keep communities safe from wildfires. And we actually have a national program called FireSmart that uses that information to make guidelines and recommendations. Then towns and cities work with wildfire agencies to assess what they actually need to change. And all of that sounds solid. But there's a big difference between having the assessment and actually doing the work. And many communities don't follow through. Money and time are a part of the reasons. More on that later. But aesthetics also play a big role. Let me show you what I mean. Edmonton, where I live, just recently approved a grant application for a FireSmart assessment, and it's gonna happen right here. They picked your award for this, largely because of how much green space you guys have that's so close to homes. What were to happen if the pilot programs and the assessment says, hey, you might need to cut some of this down?
That would not be a popular choice. I think that would be easily understood, that people would not want to see that this natural space taken away from the communities.
How likely is it, do you think, that the city would be willing to tear trees down or make a sacrifice like that?
I think that's a last resort, honestly, and I don't want people to be left with the impression that that is the first thing we're thinking about, or that that's even on the radar. This community would not want it. I don't think any community that has a ravine running through it in Edmonton would be happy with that.
Do you think there's anything that would change people's minds on that?
No, I don't.
And you might be right about that. Would you be willing to cut down the trees you like if it meant your house would have less of a chance to burn down?
No, of course not. There's no risk of fire in this area of any consequence anyway. Unless you have a lightning strike in the middle of your home, nothing's going to happen by way of fire. It's silly.
That hits on one of the most common reasons people are slow to adopt FireSmart's recommendations. Most people don't expect their house to go up in flames, but it does happen.
They didn't even let us take our things and when we asked them. So we lost everything.
Everything I worked for the last 2 years, it's all gone in smoke now.
The 2016 wildfire in Fort McMurray destroyed about 2,500 buildings and triggered a mass evacuation. After a terrible fire like that, you might think people are quick to make changes, but that's not always the case. One study done not long after the fire found that while many Fort McMurray residents did take some FireSmart steps, like cleaning debris or cutting grass, few took on the bigger, more expensive changes, like cutting down trees or upgrading their roofs. The most cited reasons for not doing it? The high cost, and not thinking a fire like that could happen again.
There's so many fires that are...
Researcher Haley Hessel also looked into how people adopt FireSmart measures in communities across the country.
It's a short window of opportunity when you've had a large wildfire, particularly one that's very damaging. People see the damage it can do and they realize that they are at risk.
And once that window's closed,
it's really difficult to get people to protect themselves. People take risks. They don't perceive the risk of fire. The people who do adopt FireSmart will do some of the least expensive things first, and it's the big expensive things like retrofitting, changing the roof from something wooden to metal that's going to cost a lot.
Yes, it does cost a lot, in terms of both money and time. For communities, it's often actually easier to get money to do an assessment than it is to get money to do whatever that assessment recommends. And it can be even harder for people who want to FireSmart their own houses. Let's take Edmonton, for example. It can cost between 5 to 10 grand or even more to replace your roof with fireproof material. Hiring someone to take down that big, flammable tree in your backyard can run about $1,000. And who has the time?
It's definitely a work in progress, and I don't even have that big of a property. I'm on 1.78 acres right on the edge of the city.
Skylar McEwen decided to FireSmart her house after watching a wildfire come within 15 feet of her childhood home in Nova Scotia.
So what would you say it is that's stopping you right now from fully getting the job done?
It's a huge undertaking because once you do all the underbrushing, then you have to get it removed. Again, we have access to a dump truck. Lots of people don't. It's still really time consuming.
And that doesn't even touch on renters or seniors who live on their pensions. And you might be willing to make that investment on your home, but fireproofing works best when everybody does it, and maybe your neighbors aren't willing to do it.
Oh, this is nice.
Even the people who work at FireSmart have a hard time keeping up with all the recommendations.
The one piece that we couldn't achieve was the deck.
So many people we spoke to want to FireSmart their homes, but either they can't afford or don't want to invest thousands of dollars to prepare for a wildfire that hasn't happened yet. How do you deal with that?
We are currently piloting a rebate program in 3 communities in Alberta. What happens is our local resident can sign up for an advanced FireSmart home assessment, and once they've completed the assessment, they're then eligible to apply for grant funding to complete one of the recommendations with the report.
Since that rebate pilot kicked off, Laura says they've seen a 367% increase in the number of home assessments they've done. So will these plans pay off? Right now, it's hard to say. Nothing is ever simple or straightforward when it comes to wildfires, but there are places that are already getting creative when it comes to fire smarting. In BC, there's Logan Lake, Canada's first fire smart community. Homeowners can pay about $40 to get a sprinkler installed in their roof. In Quesnel, where Stryler's from, they let goats take care of the heavy vegetation around the city. And as a homeowner, even if you can't take on some of FireSmart's bigger, more expensive recommendations, everything you and your neighbors can do counts. So you can cut your grass regularly, keep flammable materials like leaves, twigs, and mulch at least 10 meters away from your house. And when you're thinking of planting, you can pick fire-resistant trees and shrubs like columbine or birch. Back at the beginning of this video, I told you it was possible to make your home and your community safer from wildfires, if you were willing to make the effort. That's not to say it'll ever be perfect. Wildfires are wild, and no matter what you do, you can't control them. But we can adapt to them. So ask yourself, what are you willing to do?